The Galactic Empire stretched across thousands of worlds, ruling with absolute control. No species had ever dared to challenge their might. When reports came in about a newly discovered race called humans, no one in the Empire took it seriously. Admiral Xyrek of the Imperial Fleet leaned back in his command chair, smirking. Humans, he scoffed. Another primitive species trying to survive in the dark. They won't last a cycle against us. A scout fleet of 5 Imperial warships was sent to investigate. Their mission was simple: observe, intimidate, and, if necessary, eliminate any potential threat. The fleet arrived at the coordinates provided by a long-range probe. A single human colony rested on the surface of an unremarkable planet. Pathetic, Captain Orvik muttered, watching the live feed from the scanners. The colony was small, with simple buildings and no visible defenses. There were no energy shields, no planetary cannons, no signs of an advanced military. It looked like an easy conquest. Orvik opened a channel to the fleet. No resistance detected. We will make contact and establish Imperial authority. As soon as he finished speaking, something strange happened. The fleet's long-range sensors flickered. The starship's navigation systems glitched for a moment before returning to normal. Then one of the warships, the Vindicta, vanished from the scanners. Orvik frowned. What just happened? No explosion detected, sir, an officer reported. The ship is just gone. Orvik tried to open a communication channel with the Vindicta, but there was no response. It was as if the ship had never existed. A chill ran down his spine. Send a signal to the rest of the fleet. Full combat alert. Something is out there. Before the message could be sent, another ship disappeared. Panic spread through the crew. Alarm sirens blared. The Imperial warships activated their shields and weapons, scanning for any signs of an attacker. But the void of space remained silent. Then a voice crackled through their communication systems, cold, calm, and human. You should not have come here. Orvik's blood turned to ice. The humans were watching them. The Admiral's warship, the Dominion, opened fire blindly into the void. Energy cannons blazed across space, but they hit nothing. The enemy was unseen, unpredictable, and far more advanced than anyone had imagined. Then the third warship, the Conqueror, went silent. No explosion, no wreckage, just gone. Orvik's heart pounded. Admiral, we need to retreat. We. Static filled the bridge. The lights flickered. The artificial gravity shifted. The main screen showed a terrifying sight. The Dominion was breaking apart, its hull being torn open by an invisible force. Admiral Xyrek barely had time to process what was happening before the ship was swallowed by darkness. The last thing Captain Orvik heard was a final transmission from an unknown source. They see you. They know you. You are not ready for them. And then, silence. The escape pod drifted silently through the void, carrying the only survivor of the doomed fleet. Captain Orvik clutched the edges of his seat, staring blankly at the emergency display. The numbers flickered. Oxygen levels stable. Trajectory locked. But his mind refused to accept the reality of what had happened. 5 Imperial warships, some of the finest in the fleet, had vanished without a trace. No wreckage. No distress signals. Nothing. Just gone. He had seen it happen with his own eyes. One moment, the Dominion was intact, its weapons blazing into the void. The next, it had simply ceased to exist, as though reality itself had erased it. And now, he was the only one left. Orvik activated the emergency beacon. The Empire had to know. They had to prepare. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't matter. Whatever humanity was hiding, whatever power they possessed, it was far beyond anything the Empire had ever faced. On the capital world of Virex Prime, Grand Marshal Zorvik stood before the Imperial High Council, his expression unreadable as he listened to the lone survivor's report. "This is absurd," scoffed one of the council members, a reptilian aristocrat. You're telling us that an unknown species, one we have never even heard of, managed to destroy an entire fleet without firing a single visible shot. Orvik nodded, his hands still shaking. They didn't just destroy us. They erased us. I don't know how, but they were watching us the whole time. They let us think we were in control, and then they struck. Another council member, an avian diplomat, clicked his beak in disbelief. Do you have proof? Orvik hesitated. He had managed to transmit a single data fragment before his escape pod launched. Distorted readings, brief glimpses of an unknown energy source, and the chilling transmission that had echoed through the ship's comms. You should not have come here. The council reviewed the data, their arrogance slowly giving way to unease. The energy readings were unlike anything in the Empire's archives. No known technology could interfere with Imperial sensors like that, let alone erase ships from existence. Finally, Grand Marshal Zorvek spoke. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed a hint of concern. We cannot ignore this. He turned to the Emperor's personal advisor. Send a second fleet, double the strength of the first. I want full combat readiness, shields at maximum, and every ship armed with the latest tracking technology. Orvik swallowed hard. It won't matter, he muttered. Zorvek narrowed his eyes. Explain. They let me live, Orvik said. Not because they couldn't stop me, but because they chose not to. He looked around the chamber, at the powerful leaders who had ruled the Empire for generations. We are not the hunters in this war. We are the prey. A week later, the second fleet, twice as large as the first, arrived at the human colony. From orbit, the planet looked just as it had before. No warships, no visible defenses. Just a quiet, unremarkable world spinning beneath them. Admiral Korak sneered as he stood on the bridge of his flagship. So this is what the Council was afraid of. The barren rock. He turned to his second in command. Begin planetary bombardment. Wipe them out. The order was given. The fleet's weapons powered up. Massive energy cannons targeted key locations on the surface. The Empire would make an example of this world. But before the first shot could be fired, the darkness returned. One by one, the ships began losing power. The engines sputtered. The lights flickered. Weapon systems went offline. And then, just like before, they started disappearing. Admiral Korak's rage turned to confusion as his screens flashed red. What is happening? Report. A terrified officer turned to him, sweat dripping down his forehead. Sir, we have incoming vessels. Korak's eyes widened. From where? There's nothing on the... Then he saw them. The human ships didn't warp in. They didn't arrive through normal space. They materialized from the darkness itself, as if the void had given birth to them. Sleek, black, and silent, they moved like predators through the night. Korak barely had time to react before the first Imperial cruiser was split in half, not by an explosion, but by a force no one could comprehend. Screams filled the comms. Crew members begged for orders, for guidance, for anything that could save them, but there was no saving them. Then the voice returned, calm, cold, unstoppable. You were warned. The flagship shuddered. Korak stumbled, gripping the edge of his command console. The bridge's main display flickered to life, showing a single message in an unfamiliar but hauntingly precise script. Your empire ends here. And then, just like before, the fleet began to vanish. The Imperial Senate was in chaos. The loss of 2 fleets was unheard of. Never in the Empire's long history had they suffered such an absolute, unexplained defeat. Entire ships vanishing without a trace, seasoned commanders unable to fight back. A new enemy that did not negotiate or declare war, just silence and destruction. The Emperor himself, a being who had ruled for centuries through military might and unchallenged authority, sat in his throne chamber, listening to the latest reports. His golden robes gleamed under the artificial light, but his face was dark with anger. What do we know about these humans? he demanded. Grand Marshal Zorvik, the highest-ranking officer of the Imperial fleet, stepped forward. His usually confident demeanor was replaced by something the Emperor had never seen before: hesitation. "They are unlike any species we have encountered," Zorvik admitted. "We do not know the limits of their technology. They have no recorded homeworld, no known trade routes, and no diplomatic history with any other species. It is as if they appeared from nowhere." The Emperor clenched his jaw. "And yet, they have destroyed 2 of my fleets. You mean to tell me that a race we never even considered a threat is now our greatest enemy?" Zorvik took a deep breath. "We believe they allowed the lone survivor, Captain Orvik, to escape, as a warning." The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "A warning?" Zorvik nodded. "They wanted us to know that they are watching, that they chose to strike when they did, and that if we do not stop, they will end us." The chamber fell silent. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Then the Emperor did something no one expected. He laughed. It was a low, cruel sound. He stood up, his deep red cape flowing behind him as he descended from his throne. "A warning," he repeated. "Then we should be grateful. Not all enemies announce their presence before striking." He turned to Zorvik, his expression cold and calculating. "We will not run from shadows, Grand Marshal. If these humans are as powerful as you say, then we will force them into the light." He looked at the gathered senators, his voice ringing through the chamber. "Mobilize the Third Armada. Not 1 fleet, not 2, an entire war machine. 1,000 warships, tens of millions of troops. I want human space burned to ashes." Zorvik hesitated. He knew this was a mistake, but he also knew that questioning the Emperor meant death. So he bowed. "As you command, my Emperor." The Third Armada moved through the void like a storm. Never before had the Empire gathered so many warships for a single operation. Every dreadnought, battleship, and cruiser gleamed under the starlight, their weapons fully charged, their shields at maximum power. On the bridge of the command ship, the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Voss stood with his arms behind his back. He was no fool. He had studied the reports, listened to the warnings. But he was also a warrior, and warriors did not fear the unknown. "We are approaching human space," his tactical officer reported. Voss nodded. "Scan for enemy vessels." The officer hesitated. "Sir, there's nothing." Voss frowned. "Impossible. There must be something. No energy signatures, no planetary defenses, no ships in range." The officer's voice was uneasy. "It's as if we're alone." Voss did not like this. He had expected a brutal battle. Instead, he was looking at nothing. Then the first ship disappeared. It was a dreadnought, the Emperor's Wrath. One moment, it was there, cruising at full speed. The next, its signal was gone. No explosion, no debris, just gone. Then, a second, a third. Panic spread through the fleet. Officers shouted over comms, trying to make sense of the situation. "Where are they?" One captain screamed, "What is happening?" Then, a new voice entered the communication channel. It was not Imperial. It was not human. It was something else entirely. "You do not belong here." Voss's blood ran cold. "Who is this?" he demanded. "You were warned." Voss turned to his tactical officer. "Find the source of that signal. Now." The officer's fingers raced over the controls. "Sir, it's coming from inside the fleet." Voss's stomach dropped. That was impossible. Then the first human ship appeared. It did not arrive through hyperspace. It did not decloak. It simply materialized out of the void. A massive black warship, its surface seemingly absorbing all light, its weapons glowing with eerie blue energy. Then another appeared, and another. Within seconds, hundreds of human ships surrounded the Third Armada. Voss barely had time to react before the first Imperial battleship was ripped apart. Not by lasers, not by missiles, by something else. A force that twisted metal like paper, that collapsed shields as if they didn't exist. The fleet tried to fight back. The Empire's most powerful warships fired everything they had. The darkness absorbed it all. Then the killing began. The human ships moved faster than anything Voss had ever seen. They struck with precision, erasing ships from existence one by one. Voss grabbed the emergency transmitter. To the Emperor, "We are not fighting an enemy. We are fighting something beyond us. We must retreat." But there was no answer, because the capital world of Virex Prime was already burning. The Imperial Palace was built to withstand planetary sieges, orbital bombardments, and even the collapse of empires. Its golden towers stretched into the sky of Virex Prime, a symbol of the Empire's eternal rule. No invader had ever set foot inside. Until now. The alarms blared across the capital, shrieking like dying animals. The sky had turned black, not from smoke, but from something else. The void itself seemed to twist and pulse above them, swallowing the stars, stretching shadows where there should have been light. The Emperor stood in his private war chamber, surrounded by his most elite guards. His expression remained cold, but deep within his mind, something clawed at him, a feeling he had never experienced before. Fear. He turned to the massive tactical display. The Third Armada was gone, the largest fleet in the history of the Empire, erased in less than an hour. And now, the capital itself was under attack. "Report," he snapped. A trembling officer tried to speak. "Your Majesty, we don't know how they arrived. Our planetary defenses never detected them. One moment, the system was secure. The next, they were already here." The Emperor's hands curled into fists. "How many ships?" The officer hesitated. We can't count them. They are coming in and out of our space at will. They don't follow the rules of war." The Emperor's blood turned to ice. Not following the rules was something the Empire had never encountered before. Every species had a pattern, a way of fighting, a structure. Even the weakest foes had logic behind their tactics. But this was something else. Then the palace shook. The golden walls trembled. Statues of past emperors cracked and crumbled. They were here. The royal guards raised their weapons. The Emperor took a step back. The grand entrance doors, made from reinforced neutron steel, imploded inward. And for the first time, the Emperor saw them. Not through distorted images, not through ship readings. Humans. But they did not look like the primitive species the Empire had dismissed. They did not look weak. They did not look afraid. They moved with unnatural precision, as if they already knew what would happen next. Their armor was a sleek black, seeming to shimmer between reality and something else. Their weapons hummed softly, glowing with a blue energy that the Emperor did not understand. And their eyes were worse than anything. Because their eyes did not belong to conquerors. They did not belong to raiders, warriors, or revolutionaries. They belonged to something far worse. Predators. The lead soldier stepped forward. He removed his helmet, revealing a face that should have looked ordinary. But something about it was wrong. His expression was calm. Too calm. His eyes scanned the Emperor not with hatred, not with rage, but with curiosity. As if the Emperor was the experiment and humanity was the scientist. "You thought you ruled the stars," the human said, his voice smooth, almost amused. "You thought yourselves invincible." The Emperor stayed silent. Words would not save him now. The human tilted his head slightly. "You never even considered that something stronger than you might be out here, did you?" The Emperor clenched his jaw. "You don't understand what you're doing," he hissed. "You kill me, and the Empire will never stop hunting you." The human smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Oh, your empire is already dead," he said. "You just haven't realized it yet." Behind him, more humans stepped into the chamber. Their presence seemed to warp the space around them, as if reality itself struggled to contain them. The Emperor felt something he had not felt since he was a child, a deep animalistic terror. "Who are you?" he whispered. The human leaned in slightly. We are the ones you ignored, the ones you dismissed as weak. His smile widened, but his eyes remained cold. We are the unseen threat. And now, he raised his weapon. You finally see us. A single pulse of blue energy filled the chamber. And then, darkness. The Imperial Senate chamber was eerily silent. Where once political debates and grand speeches echoed, now only the hum of emergency lights remained. The vast hall, built to hold thousands of the Empire's most powerful rulers, was nearly empty. The few senators who remained stood in clusters, whispering in hushed, terrified voices. Some still clutched ceremonial robes, as if their titles and traditions would protect them. Others gripped weapons, though they knew it was futile. Because the war was over. The Empire had not fallen in a glorious last stand. There had been no desperate final battle, no rallying cry to inspire future generations. There had only been silence. One by one, their fleets had vanished. Their defenses had failed. Their greatest leaders had simply disappeared. And now the survivors were trapped on their own world, watching the sky twist into something unnatural. The stars above Virex Prime were gone. Not blocked by ships, not hidden by smoke, gone. The humans had not simply come to conquer. They had come to erase. Senator Ralvik gripped the edge of the meeting table, his normally pristine robes stained with sweat and dust. His breathing was ragged, his twin hearts pounding. This isn't war, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. This is something else. Across from him, Senator Volric, one of the oldest members of the High Council, leaned forward, his reptilian eyes narrowing. Then what is it? He hissed. What do they want? Ralvik shook his head. I don't think they want anything. They haven't made demands. They haven't asked for surrender. His hands clenched into fists. They are simply removing us. A cold silence followed his words. For the first time in history, the Empire was powerless. There were no negotiations, no escape, just an unstoppable force that had judged them and found them unworthy. A sudden noise broke the silence. A soft, rhythmic sound. Footsteps. The senators turned toward the entrance of the chamber, their bodies tensing. The great doors, once guarded by the Empire's finest warriors, had been left unprotected. There was no one left to stand watch. The footsteps grew louder, slow, measured. Then they entered. A group of humans. 5 of them, their presence seeming to darken the air itself. They walked with an unsettling grace, as if the laws of movement barely applied to them. Their black armor gleamed under the dim emergency lights. Their weapons were at their sides. But the senators knew they didn't need them. The tallest human stepped forward. His face was hidden behind a smooth, featureless helmet. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, emotionless. This is the end. Volric's claws twitched. What do you mean? He demanded. End of what? The human's head tilted slightly. Of you. Ralvik's breathing hitched. You can't just erase an entire civilization, he said, his voice shaking. That isn't how war works. The human's helmet turned toward him. Who said this was war? Ralvik's blood ran cold. He had been right. This was not war. War required sides, an enemy that could fight back. This was something else. A verdict. The human took another step forward. The air in the chamber seemed to grow heavier. Reality itself strained under their presence. You built an empire on the backs of the weak, the human continued. You crushed those who resisted. You believed yourselves invincible. His voice was not angry. It was not filled with hate. It was simply stating a fact. And now, the human said, you face something greater than you, something you cannot conquer. The senators stared, their minds unable to process what was happening. For centuries, they had ruled the galaxy without fear. Now, they were nothing more than insects waiting to be crushed. Volric bared his teeth. You think you're gods. He spat. You're just another species, Just another power that will rise and fall like all the others. The human was silent for a moment. Then, he slowly reached up, removing his helmet. His face was ordinary. No monstrous features, no divine glow, just a man. But his eyes were infinite. It was as if he was looking at them from a place beyond time, beyond existence, a place where the Empire had already ceased to be. "You misunderstand," the human said softly. "We are not gods." Then he leaned in slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "We are worse." The chamber's lights flickered. Shadows stretched across the walls. And then, darkness. Virex Prime was silent. Not the silence of peace, not the silence of surrender, but the silence of absence. Entire districts stood empty, buildings untouched, vehicles still lined the streets. Yet there was no sound, no movement, no life. Where once 1,000,000,000,000 souls had lived, ruled, and thrived, now there was nothing. The imperial capital had not been conquered. It had not been bombed into ruin. It had not burned. It had simply ceased. High Admiral Korvac's breath came in short gasps as he ran through the darkened corridors of the imperial citadel. He had fought in 100 wars, commanded fleets that had broken entire civilizations, but nothing, not war, not training, not experience, had prepared him for this. He was alone. He had seen them disappear, his officers, his guards, even the Emperor himself. One moment they were standing beside him, the next, gone. No screams, no struggle, just empty uniforms where bodies had once stood. He didn't know how he had survived. Perhaps he had been left behind on purpose. His boots echoed as he stumbled into the command center, the massive room where the Empire's greatest leaders had once controlled the galaxy. The screens flickered erratically. The planetary defense grid showed nothing. No enemy forces, no battlecruisers, no invasion. There was no war. Just erasure. Then, the silence was broken. A soft whisper. Not words, not sound, but something else. It crawled through the air, pressing against the edges of his mind. Korvac turned, his hand gripping the blaster at his hip. But there was nothing. Nothing except the man. He stood at the center of the room, clad in sleek black armor, his face calm. He was unarmed. He was not imposing. And yet, Korvac's instincts screamed at him to run. "You?" Korvac whispered, his voice hoarse. The human said nothing. He merely watched. Korvac's grip on his weapon tightened. "What have you done?" The human tilted his head slightly, as if the question was amusing. "We have corrected the imbalance." Korvac's eyes narrowed. This was genocide. The human's gaze didn't waver. Genocide implies emotion, a desire to exterminate. We have no such desires. He stepped forward, his presence pressing against the air itself. "You were weighed. You were measured." His expression remained unreadable. "And you were found lacking." Korvac's heart pounded. He had commanded death. He had ordered the destruction of entire worlds in the name of the Empire. But now, standing before this single man, he felt something he had never felt before. Powerlessness. His blaster trembled in his grip. "Then why am I still here?" The human smiled. It was not cruel. It was not kind. It was simply inevitable. "You are here," the human said, "because you are the last." Korvac's body went cold. The last. What? The human's eyes gleamed. The last to understand. Korvac exhaled sharply. Understand what? The lights flickered. The shadows stretched. The air grew heavy. And then the human whispered, "That your empire was never as powerful as it believed." Korvac pulled the trigger. A bolt of plasma streaked through the air and passed straight through the human. As if he wasn't there, Korvac staggered back, his mind reeling. He fired again. 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 Each shot hit nothing. The human remained standing, watching, waiting. Korvac's breathing turned ragged. What? "What are you?" The human stepped closer, his voice impossibly soft. The reminder. The whisper returned, curling around Korvac's thoughts like unseen tendrils. The room darkened, the walls fading away. Korvac tried to move. He could not. The last thing he saw was everything fading into the void. And then, nothing. The galaxy did not realize the Empire was gone. Not at first. Trade routes still showed their ships in transit. Bureaucratic transmissions continued to cycle through automated networks. The Empire's vast data archives continued to broadcast their standard reports. Routine planetary updates, economic forecasts, fleet movements. But the responses never came. Diplomats sent messages. None were answered. Border colonies hailed patrols. None returned. Merchants requested docking clearance at Imperial spaceports. None replied. At first, the galactic community assumed it was an internal matter. Some kind of upheaval, a restructuring of power. But then the first ships arrived at Virex Prime. And they found nothing. The planetary defense grid was intact, but it did not react. The orbital stations still floated, but their halls were empty. The cityscapes, once vibrant with light and movement, stood frozen. An entire civilization caught mid-step. The streets were full of clothes, full of footprints in the dust, full of evidence that trillions had lived here just moments before. But there were no bodies, no wreckage, no signs of struggle, just absence. The explorers who landed on Virex Prime's surface walked its streets in eerie silence, their voices hushed as if speaking too loudly would disturb something unseen. Then they checked the archives. The last recorded log, the last transmission ever sent, was simple. A single voice, Imperial High Admiral Korvac's, filled the airwaves. His words were clipped, emotionless, but beneath them, something lurked. Something raw. Something terrified. We were wrong. The recording ended. Nothing else remained. Across the galaxy, empires, republics, and federations watched. At first, they felt relief. The most powerful force in the known universe had vanished overnight. Their war fleets, their rulers, their dominion, all erased. No one had to fight them. No one had to suffer for their downfall. But relief soon turned to dread. Because if the Empire had fallen, then the question was not who had defeated them. The question was what had judged them. Whispers spread like wildfire. Theories filled the galactic networks. Was it a cosmic disaster? A technological accident? Some ancient, long-forgotten enemy? But those who had seen the aftermath firsthand knew the truth. This was not an accident. This was not nature. This was deliberate. And the most terrifying truth of all, whoever, or whatever, had done this had not announced themselves. They had made no demands, no threats, no proclamations. They had erased the most dominant power in the galaxy without fanfare, without a single battle, without even acknowledging the rest of the universe, as if the Empire had been nothing more than an insignificant stain on reality, as if it had never mattered at all. The years passed. The Empire became a legend, a warning whispered in the dark. But sometimes, travelers reported strange things. A fleet of ships appearing in deep space, only to disappear moments later. A figure in black armor, watching from the edges of a dying star. A shadow that stretched too far, too deep, in places where no shadow should be. And sometimes, entire colonies would go silent. No distress signals, no attacks, no wreckage, just vanished. The universe learned to fear the unseen, because whatever had erased the Empire had never stopped watching.